In this video, modern AI technology is used to recreate what daily life looked like inside ancient Rome in 117 AD, specifically for the people who held the empire together, but whose names history rarely recorded. These scenes are AI-generated interpretations, based on archaeological evidence and historical records. This is the story of Rome's enslaved population, and it is far more complex and far more human than most people realize. It is dawn, 117 AD. Emperor Trajan has just breathed his last somewhere in the east. Hadrian is about to inherit the greatest empire the world has ever seen. Rome's forums gleam with marble. The Colosseum still echoes with last week's games. The aqueducts carry fresh water to 1 million souls. But the people this story follows do not see any of that beauty from the outside. They wake before the sun, not because they choose to, because if they do not, there are consequences. Fires have to be lit before the household stirs. Water has to be carried from the public fountain 2 streets over. The kitchen hearth has to be coaxed back to life. The floors have to be swept before the master's sandals touch them. This was Rome in 117 AD, the height of the empire. A city of nearly 1 million people. Historians estimate that somewhere between 20 and 40% of the population of Italy were enslaved. In the city of Rome itself, possibly 400,000 people lived in bondage. 1 out of every 3 people passing on the street. They were not a single group. They were not all the same. Under Roman law, an enslaved person was not recognized as a person at all. The legal term was res, a thing, a piece of property. An owner could beat them, brand them, sell their children, or use them however they pleased. And most Romans considered this completely normal. Some woke to the clinking of iron. Some woke to the quiet of a sleeping household. All of them woke to work. They came from everywhere, from the Dacian Wars and the Jewish revolts, from pirate raids along the Mediterranean coast. Some were children born to enslaved mothers who automatically became property from their first breath. Some had been abandoned as infants and picked up from the street. Some were captured soldiers whose names and languages were taken from them before the chains were. But once inside the system, there were, broadly, 2 very different worlds, and survival depended entirely on which one a person landed in. The vast agricultural estates, latifundia, that fed the empire stretched across Italy, Sicily, and the provinces. On these estates, enslaved workers slept in ergastula, windowless underground barracks. Some were chained at night. An overseer, often a fellow enslaved person who had been promoted to enforce discipline, opened the door before sunrise. The day that followed lasted 12 to 14 hours, plowing fields with wooden tools, harvesting wheat under the Italian summer sun, pressing olives until the hands cracked and bled. Women and children worked beside the men, children weeding, carrying water, learning early that certain feelings were too costly to hold on to. Cato the Elder, whose agricultural writings still guided many landowners in this period, described enslaved workers plainly as instrumenti vocale, talking tools. When a worker grew too old or too sick to be productive, evidence suggests many were simply discarded. The second world was the city, and it looked different. In a wealthy urban domus on the Palatine or Esquiline Hill, the enslaved household staff still had no legal rights, but they had a bed instead of a stone floor. They ate better, leftovers from the master's table, real bread, sometimes wine. They wore clean tunics. Some managed the entire household. Some tutored the children, copied correspondence in careful Latin, or whispered the names of arriving dinner guests into their owner's ear. Educated Greek-speaking enslaved people were especially valued as secretaries, physicians, and tutors. Some were given a small personal fund, called a peculium, that they could accumulate over years. Freedom, in this world, was at least theoretically visible on the horizon. These were not two equal experiences. They were two different degrees of the same thing. Even within those two worlds, there were further degrees. At the absolute worst end sat the mines and quarries, the silver mines of Spain, the marble quarries of Egypt and Greece. To be sent there was understood, by both the enslaved and their owners, as a death sentence measured in months. Chained underground, breathing rock dust by the light of small oil lamps, hauling stone until the body gave out. Historians record that the average life expectancy after arrival in the mines was less than 2 years. Then there were the gladiatorial schools, where enslaved men trained to fight and die for crowds. And the legal category of infames, those whose occupations placed them at the very bottom of Roman social order, with no protection and no dignity recognized by law. But even in the best household situations, fear was constant. One mistake, a broken piece of expensive pottery, a misunderstood order, an accusation from another member of the household, and a person could be sold to the mines by the following week. There was also the law of collective punishment. If a master was murdered, every enslaved person in the household could be executed, regardless of guilt or innocence. This law was applied in documented cases throughout the Roman period. The threat did not need to be spoken aloud. Everyone in the household already knew. The Roman day was divided by the movement of the sun. There were no clocks in any modern sense. Time was measured by sundials in the Forum and water clocks in wealthier homes. For most enslaved people, the day began in darkness and ended in darkness. For a household worker in a large urban domus, the morning began before the first hour of light. Water had to be fetched. It did not come from a tap. It came from the nearest public fountain, which could be a street or more away. A full terracotta amphora weighed close to 50 pounds. Multiple trips, every morning, before the household opened its eyes. By mid-morning, the house was fully alive. The atrium swept, the kitchen fire burning steadily. Food preparation underway for the evening cena, the main meal, which could take much of the day to prepare for a household of any status. The enslaved moved through the same rooms as the family. They stood beside them, served beside them, heard their conversations, knew their secrets, and were largely looked through, as though invisible. Evidence from Roman legal texts, letters, and satirical writing suggests that the daily atmosphere inside a household varied enormously depending on the character of the owner. Some households were described as functioning with a kind of household order that allowed for stability and even small kindnesses. Others were environments of arbitrary punishment, sexual violence, and constant fear. There was no authority to appeal to, no legal protection, no one to tell. After the day's work wound down, the city's enslaved people had small fragments of time. In back courtyards and shared sleeping rooms, people gathered and spoke, in Greek, in Aramaic, in Dacian, in the Germanic languages of the northern provinces, languages their owners often did not understand, languages that still held the shape of lives that existed before. Enslaved people formed contubernium, informal unions, partnerships, families that carried no legal standing whatsoever. A couple could not legally marry. Children born to enslaved mothers belonged to the owner. A family could be separated and sold at any time, for any reason or none. Some quietly worshiped the gods of their home regions alongside the required Roman ones. Isis, Mithras, the Great Mother, carried in memory from places that no longer existed for them. and some saved. Carefully, slowly, over years. Every small coin of peculium set aside. Every extra service performed in the hope that it would be noticed and remembered. Because freedom was not an abstraction. It was a transaction, and transactions required accumulation. Freedom was not impossible. That is one of the facts historians consistently note, and it is one of the things that made Rome's system distinct from some later forms of forced labor in history. Manumission, the formal legal act of freeing an enslaved person, was practiced widely enough that Roman law had detailed rules governing how it was done. An owner could grant freedom in a will. They could perform a ceremony before a magistrate. They could declare it in front of witnesses in an informal setting. All were recognized. Some enslaved people purchased their own freedom outright, using years of accumulated peculium. Roman law permitted it, provided the owner agreed. Once freed, a person became a libertus, a freedman or freedwoman. They did not become equal to free-born Roman citizens. They carried social stigma. They remained bound by obligations to their former owner. They could not hold certain political offices, but their children, born after the manumission, were born free, full citizens. That line mattered. Some freed people went on to build businesses, accumulate property, and achieve a level of wealth that was socially uncomfortable for the Roman elite who depended on the very institution that had produced them. Some of Rome's most skilled architects, physicians, and merchants had begun their lives as property. Historians note that the existence of manumission, however conditional, however selective, shaped behavior throughout the entire system. The possibility of freedom, even a distant one, was itself a form of control, and most people who were enslaved never reached it. What they left behind. They did not leave much. That is one of the quiet truths of this history. The wax tablets they wrote on were smoothed and reused. The letters written about them were composed by others for other purposes. The laws that governed their lives were designed by the people who owned them, and yet the traces exist. Archaeologists have found the scratches, small names carved into building stones, not by professional masons but by hands that simply needed to leave a mark. Grave markers paid for by freed people who wanted something to remain. Brief inscriptions that record a name, an age, sometimes an occupation. Evidence of people who insisted, in the smallest ways available to them, on being seen. The bones tell other stories. Analysis of skeletal remains from Roman-era burial sites shows patterns of repetitive stress injuries, healed fractures from hard labor, and evidence of lives that ended earlier than they should have. The physical record of what the written record mostly omits. Evidence suggests that some built genuine networks within the system, burial clubs that pooled small contributions so members could have a proper funeral. Informal communities of people from the same regions. Mutual support organized quietly, carefully, within the boundaries of what was allowed. What they thought of their lives. What they felt when the day finally ended and there were no more tasks. What they dreamed about, what they mourned, what they still hoped for. Most of that is gone. Taken by the same system that took everything else. What remains is the city they helped build, the roads still visible under European soil, the aqueducts still standing in Spain and France and North Africa, the libraries, the grain supply, the infrastructure of an empire of 1 million people in a single city. All of it ran, in significant part, on their labor. Some found unexpected kindness within a brutal system. Some found a path to freedom and walked it. Many found only an early grave, unmarked and unrecorded. But every single one of them was a human being, with a name their mother gave them, in a language Rome tried to erase, in a place that no longer existed by the time the empire was done with it. Rome did not remember them by name. History is still trying to. Thank you for watching. If this story stayed with you, leave a comment below. Tell us which part of their lives you'll remember. And subscribe, because there are thousands more forgotten stories waiting.